You said in August you thought he might be afraid of you and afraid of the women that are coming to Congress.
Well, I don't know if he knows how to deal with women in power and women with strength, but we'll see. Let's hope for the best in that regard, because, again, it is a new day for many people in Congress and in Washington, D.C. and in the country.
All right, Nancy Pelosi speaking exclusively with the Today Show this morning. Newly elected lawmakers are set to swear in on Capitol Hill today, including this group of history-making House women posing for a photo taken for Vanity Fair and posted on Instagram by incoming New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Among them is our next guest, Democrat Sharice Davids of Kansas, Mike Barnicle, Susan Del Percio, Michael Steele, and Casey Hunt are back with us as well. Thank you very much for being on the show with us this morning. I want to first ask you about the shutdown and how your constituents are faring. How are they being affected by the shutdown?
Well, certainly there have been a lot of folks who have reached out to us who are federal employees, and then because they are not sure when they're going to get paid next. There are a lot of people who are doing work, unsure of when they'll get their next paycheck, because they really do services and help on programs that are essential to the functioning of our federal government and that our citizens really need. And, you know, there have been a number of people who've reached out because they're concerned about how long this will go on and whether or not it will impact their lives, you know, not just the civil service workers.
Yeah, we're already at day 13. So what will the Democrats' strategy be to try and bring this to an end?
Well, I can tell you that one of the first things that we're going to be voting on today is going to be a funding package that will get the government back up and running so that we can perform those functions that the American people need. We're going to be voting on something that has previously had bipartisan support on the Senate side, and that will hopefully be able to, you know, pass both houses and have this president sign a bill that's going to get the government back open, because you know, that's part of our duty, is to make sure that we're doing everything we can to take care of the American people.
Mike Barnicle.
Congresswoman Davids, let me ask you, you're one of two Native American members of Congress, or about to be once you're sworn in. You must be very proud of that. I don't blame you. But can you give me a rough guess, an estimate, how many of your fellow members do you think are aware of living conditions among Native Americans in places like the Pine Ridge Reservation, other reservations in this country? I mean, there's not just two Americas. There are seemingly three Americans when it comes to the way Native Americans live. So what's your estimate? How many members are really aware of these conditions? How many Americans are aware of these conditions?
Well, I guess the first thing I want to say is that just the fact that Deb and I will be here, you know, Congresswoman Haaland and I will be here, is going to raise awareness and an opportunity to share both the historical aspects and then how Native communities are experiencing life today in you know, the modern era. I think that there are not enough people who understand this area, who understand Native communities and, frankly, the federal tribal government-to-government relationship that exists. But even just the fact that you're asking me about this right now is evidence that we are going to see a new era of information, of people understanding, and hopefully of change.
Susan Del Percio.
Congresswoman, one of the things, you know, we've talked about the shutdown, but there's also a lot of discussion of what other policies will be brought forward and what you can do on a legislative agenda. One of the things that you mentioned was treating gun violence as a public health crisis. And I'm just curious, how do you see that shaping up, and what would that actually mean?
Well, you know, I think about this in a holistic way. This is why I call it a public health crisis, because one of the things that I know we have not done enough of is gathering metrics. So, you know, setting up the framework for how we're going to address this is going to require that we have a full understanding of all the information that's out there. The CDC needs to be able to study the statistics around this. Metrics are how we decide what's important, and right now we're not studying this enough and with the depth that it requires. We also need to make sure that, people who are able to get their hands on firearms right now, who maybe have a history of domestic violence or propensity or likelihood of harming themselves, are not able to get their hands on firearms. And then, so there's the metrics, the people, and then also the hardware. When we think about things like bump stocks, which I'm happy to see that there's been some movement around some of these hardware pieces, that we're addressing it in a holistic manner, not just one small piece of it at a time.
Casey Hunt.
Congresswoman-elect, good to see you. You are part of a historic class of women who are coming in to be sworn in this Congress. And as this is unfolding, there are also questions swirling about the 2020 race and about Nancy Pelosi's speakership. We heard her weigh in on what it's like to be a woman across the table from Donald Trump. You also have Elizabeth Warren jumping into the 2020 campaign. I'm wondering, what do you think the dynamics are as a woman in politics for Nancy Pelosi sitting across from Trump, but also for Warren, who immediately confronted headlines about her quote unquote likability? What did you learn in your own race, and what do you see? What should Democrats be wary of as they head in to the next year or two?
I definitely learned a lot about, one, what it's like to be a politician in my own election cycle. It was certainly eye-opening. I think the added dynamic of being one of the kind of younger candidates that ran this year, not the youngest, but one of the younger ones. I think there are a lot of dynamics that come into play just in terms of your perceived authority. And the amazing thing about this class is we have so many people who are so qualified to hold these positions, to be making the decisions that we're going to have to make, that are going to be tough decisions. And that cuts across gender lines. All of the people who ran that are women are highly qualified for these positions, and that to me is it sets the tone for how we should be examining and evaluating the people that are running for office. We have so many people who could have ran a long time ago and didn't because of some of the historical impediments to women running for office. But this midterm election cycle has reset the expectations for how many women run every year.
Absolutely groundbreaking. Congresswoman-elect Sharice Davids, thank you very much for being on the show this morning. Congratulations on everything.
Thank you.
And coming up, Senator Dick Durbin was among the few people inside the Situation Room yesterday as Democrats and the president circled each other over funding for the border wall. Senator Durbin joins us live next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.